I stood frozen as the metal claws descended. My bright orange Lamborghini, my dream, my soul, my 8 years of sacrifices, screamed as the hydraulic crusher bit into its body. Each crunch of metal was a heartbeat I would never get back. $350,000 of precision engineering and leather became a pile of twisted scrap, and I could barely breathe. Victoria Sterling stood just 20 feet away, her arms crossed, that perfect suburban smile curving into something sinister. The sun glinted off her diamond bracelet as she pointed a manicured finger at me. "This," she said for the benefit of the neighbors gathered on the curb, "is what happens when you violate parking regulations, Mr. Reeves." Her voice was smooth, like a snake sliding through wet grass. The neighbors whispered, phones recorded, someone even laughed. They didn't see what that car meant to me. It wasn't just metal and paint. It was 8 years of eating instant noodles while my coworkers ordered steaks. 8 years of volunteering for unpaid overtime so I could stash away another $100 at a time. 8 years of dreaming about the day I would fly down the Pacific Coast Highway, engine roaring, wind tearing at my hair, a soundtrack to freedom and everything I had earned with my own 2 hands. And now, it was nothing but a 3-foot cube of crushed orange and black, reflecting the morning sun like a coffin made of mirrors. I didn't cry. I thought of my father instead, the first time he let me drive his rusted old pickup down the dirt road behind our house. "Son," he said, one hand on the wheel, "a man's car tells his story. What story do you want to tell?" Today, my story was humiliation. A pile of wreckage, a laugh for the neighbors, a victory for a woman who thought she ruled the world. And she didn't even know the monster she had just awakened. Because I'm not just some guy with a car. I'm a hydraulic engineer. The person who designed the drainage system that keeps this very neighborhood alive, every fountain, every garden, every shimmering drop of water in Crystal Lake. I know the hidden veins of this community, the pipes and valves and secrets that flow beneath the perfect streets. And standing there, while Victoria Sterling filmed my heartbreak for the HOA Facebook page, I remembered something. Something dangerous. Crystal Lake, the jewel of this gated paradise, wasn't a real lake at all. It was mine to control. I watched the last shard of my Lamborghini fall into the scrap bin as the crane operator wiped his hands and the neighbors dispersed. Victoria's iPhone was still raised, recording my every twitch of pain. Her caption was probably already written. "Rules matter in quality communities." She thought she had won. She thought she had crushed me. But in that moment, as the summer breeze carried the scent of engine oil and asphalt to my nose, I didn't feel broken. I felt awake. Walking back to my modest home, my shoes scuffing the flawless brick sidewalk, I passed the glittering water of Crystal Lake. It reflected the sky like a sheet of glass, broken only by the ripples of a family of ducks near Victoria's private dock. Behind them, the row of 8 lakefront mansions gleamed, each worth between $4 and $8 million, each the pinnacle of suburban power and ego. I knew every inch of the system that kept this neighborhood alive. I knew that the lake's water levels depended on pipes running under my property. I knew which valves controlled which streams, which pressure points could turn paradise into panic. Victoria didn't. She was playing checkers. I was about to play chess, with water, gravity, and time as my allies. But before I even thought of revenge, I had to understand her game. Back home, I opened my laptop, hands still trembling with a cocktail of rage and adrenaline. I pulled up the original 1987 municipal blueprints for Silverbrook Estates. And there it was. Crystal Lake wasn't a lake. It was a stormwater retention pond, an engineered marvel meant to capture runoff and maintain controlled flow to the municipal drainage system. It was never supposed to sit that high. never supposed to feed waterfalls and fountains like some suburban Versailles. And yet, as I had noticed in passing, the water level today was a full 6 feet higher than the original design. Someone, Victoria, had been cheating. Boosting water pressure, overfeeding her fountains, keeping the lake like a private mirror for her vanity. And she had just destroyed the car that represented everything I'd bled for. I exhaled slowly. I didn't want to hurt anyone, I didn't want to destroy homes. But justice, real justice, isn't polite. That night, as the sun dipped below the manicured rooftops, I slipped into the shadows by the water's edge. My old survey equipment, which Victoria had once photographed as suspicious, rested in my hands like a weapon forged from patience and precision. I measured, I calculated, I listened to the hum of illegal pumps churning beneath the surface of her property. And I smiled. Because I realized something that would change everything. I could bring her entire empire to its knees without breaking a single law. Not with fists. Not with threats. With water. I went to bed that night, heart pounding with both fear and exhilaration. The crushed Lamborghini was still burned into my brain, but so was the plan forming in the dark. This wasn't just revenge anymore. It was an engineering problem. And I always solve my problems. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of sprinklers. Not mine. Victoria. The faint hiss carried across the silent street, a taunting whisper in the dawn air. I walked out to get my mail, just to see it with my own eyes. Her fountains were alive, sparkling like diamonds in the early sun, shooting arcs of stolen water into the air. And there she was. Victoria Sterling. Bathrobe, coffee in hand, a queen surveying her kingdom from her balcony. Her smile was a little too satisfied, her wave a little too smug. Like she'd already forgotten that she'd crushed a man's dream yesterday and turned it into a viral neighborhood spectacle. I clenched my fists and forced myself to smile back. Because my war wasn't going to be fought with public tantrums. It was going to be fought underground, through the very veins of this community. By the time the sun rose higher, I was in my garage, sliding on my gloves and dusting off my old surveying kit. Every piece of equipment had a story. The tripod I used in grad school, the pressure gauge I carried into my first job, the infrared scanner that had cost me a month's rent but saved a city from flooding. Today, they were tools of war. The neighborhood was quiet as I started walking the perimeter of the lake. My boots sank slightly in the manicured grass as I stopped every 50 feet, planting stakes, scanning depths, recording readings. The numbers came in, one by one. And each one told the same story. The lake was bloated. 18 feet deep, 6 feet higher than it should have been. No natural lake rises 6 feet without someone feeding it, and I could practically hear the hum of Victoria's illegal pressure pumps beneath the surface. She was stealing from the city, from the environment, and from every homeowner who thought this was just a beautiful neighborhood feature instead of a ticking time bomb. By noon, I had what I needed. But this wasn't just about data. This was about proof. I knocked on the door of my neighbor, Harrison Blake. He opened it with a smile that didn't quite reach his tired eyes. "Jackson," he said, "I heard about the car, I'm sorry. That woman, she's been terrorizing this place for years." Harrison was a retired EPA water inspector. He'd seen his share of environmental crimes, and I knew he understood people like Victoria better than anyone. "She went too far," I said quietly, "and I think I know how to fight back." We sat in his kitchen, the faint smell of old coffee and cedar filling the room, as I spread my notes across the table. He leaned in, his gray eyebrows climbing higher with every number I showed him. 18.3 feet, he muttered. "She's insane. You realize this is not just illegal, this is dangerous. Those foundations weren't built for that much hydrostatic pressure. I nodded. I think that's the point. She's creating an illusion of paradise while setting the whole neighborhood up for disaster. And she's been doing it for years. Harrison rubbed his jaw. I filed reports 2 years ago, EPA, City Hall, even the County Water Board, but they disappeared. Bribes, I asked. He nodded grimly. 50 grand to the mayor's re-election campaign. The next month, all my reports were lost in processing. That woman, she's untouchable, or at least she thinks she is. I looked down at the blueprint I'd printed from the city archives. Not anymore. The plan was forming in my mind, every valve and pipeline like a nerve in a body I could control. If Victoria thought power meant Facebook posts and HOA votes, she was about to learn what real control looked like. That night, I returned to the lake with Harrison at my side. The moon turned the water silver, and the hum of Victoria's pumps was louder than ever. I crouched by the municipal access panel on my property, one she couldn't touch without breaking the law, and unlocked it with my engineer's key. Inside was the heart of the system: valves, meters, pressure regulators, all of it humming with quiet obedience. 15%, I murmured. That's all it would take, a gentle reduction in inflow. The pressure loop she's created will collapse on itself. Harrison gave me a long, careful look. Jackson, are you sure about this? I hesitated. Not because I doubted the plan. Because I knew that crossing this line would change everything. This wasn't about a car anymore. This was about reclaiming dignity in a world where people like Victoria believed that power was a toy, and the rest of us were just ants under her magnifying glass. I closed the panel without touching the valves. Not yet, I said. I want her to feel safe. I want her to think she's won. Then I'll show her what it's like to lose everything in slow motion. Over the next few days, the harassment escalated. Victoria drove past my house every morning, slowing down just enough to snap photos of my yard. I'd see the flash of her phone camera, the self-satisfied smirk, the little wave that said, "I own you." She filed 3 new HOA complaints. My garbage can was visible from the street, for 4 minutes past the allowed time. A single weed was spotted in my flower bed. My garage door had a reflective glare that disrupted community aesthetics. I didn't respond. Not with words, anyway. Instead, I filed my own report, 47 pages of pressure readings, photographic evidence, and municipal code violations. The kind of report that made city engineers sit up and pay attention. And I waited. On the 4th day, I received a notification on my phone. HOA emergency meeting scheduled, agenda, problem resident. Of course. This was her move. She wanted me gone before I could gather enough allies or expose her empire of lies. The meeting was in 1 week. 7 days to turn the tables. 7 days to prepare the move that would shatter her illusion of control. I spent every night by the water, scanning, measuring, mapping. Harrison joined me, whispering war stories of corrupt HOAs and the bureaucracies that protected them. Every reading confirmed the same truth. Victoria had turned Crystal Lake into a fragile balloon, overinflated and trembling, ready to burst with the slightest touch. On the 6th night, I knelt beside the municipal panel again. My hands didn't shake this time. I twisted the valve. Just a hair. 15% reduction. The change was invisible to the naked eye. The water still sparkled under the moon. The ducks still floated lazily. But the system felt it. The pumps groaned, the pressure loop shifted. I stood and dusted off my hands, the night air cool against my face. Victoria Sterling had declared war. And I had just fired the first invisible shot. The first thing I noticed the next morning was the silence. No sprinklers, no fountains. Victoria's kingdom had gone quiet. I stood on my porch with a cup of coffee, savoring the morning air like a hunter listening for the first stirrings of his prey. Across the lake, her manicured gardens drooped in the heat, leaves curling, flowers bending their heads in exhaustion. It had begun. My 15% adjustment was invisible to the casual eye, but to the fragile ecosystem she'd created, it was a knife pressed to the artery. Her illegal pumps strained against the reduced flow, fighting to maintain her personal fantasy of a suburban Versailles. I walked to the lake's edge and knelt in the damp grass. The water shimmered in the sun, but I could see it, a subtle line where the water had been just the day before, a fraction lower, barely half an inch. But to me, it was a declaration. The system was bending to my will. By midday, I heard the first shout. Across the lake, a man in swim trunks yelled something toward Victoria's deck, pointing at his dock. His speedboat sat lopsided in the water, the lift groaning as it failed to compensate. I sipped my coffee and watched. Victoria emerged in her white sun hat, scanning the scene with a look of annoyance, not fear. She gestured toward the garage, and two workers, probably a day crew she'd hired under the table, hurried out to check the pumps. She still thought she could control it. Still thought the world would bend to her, well, the way her neighbors had. But water doesn't care about wealth. Water cares about pressure, flow, and balance, and I understood every one of its moods. By the second night, the drop was visible even to the untrained eye. The lake reflected the moon in a way that revealed the first shadows of mud along the shore. The ducks had to waddle through exposed earth to reach the water. That's when the text messages started. HOA group chat. Anyone else notice the water seems lower? My dock ladder isn't even touching the water now. WTH. Didn't we pay for pump maintenance last month? I smiled at my screen. Then I saw Victoria's response. Relax, neighbors, minor maintenance issue, will be fixed immediately, no cause for concern. No cause for concern. Her favorite lie. By day 3, minor maintenance had turned into full-blown panic. I was in my backyard, adjusting the tripod on my surveying kit, when I heard the unmistakable sound of shouting and splashing across the lake. Two men in waders were standing knee-deep near Victoria's dock, trying to adjust something under the water. A woman in yoga pants screamed that her koi fish were dying. I took a slow, deep breath and walked to the property line. The municipal water meter outside Victoria's house caught my eye. Yesterday, 847 gallons. Today, 1,112. She was trying to force the system back into submission. I almost laughed. Hydraulics don't negotiate. By the fourth night, I knew I had her cornered. The water had dropped almost 2 feet in total, still within my safe limits, still completely legal under my emergency maintenance protocol. But to Victoria and her lakefront loyalists, it might as well have been the apocalypse. At 11 p.m., I sat on my porch, the crickets singing like a private symphony when my phone buzzed. It was Harrison. She's losing it, he said, his voice thick with amusement. Just drove around the neighborhood yelling about sabotage. I think she's starting to suspect you. Let her, I said quietly. In the distance, the fountains were silent. No more glittering water arcs, no more Instagram-worthy displays. Just a darkness. By day 5, the smell arrived. It started faint, like wet earth, but as the sun climbed high, the exposed mud along the lake edges began to bake in the California heat. Algae and old vegetation, trapped underwater for decades, now released their odor like a whispered curse. The neighborhood paradise smelled like a swamp. Cars slowed as they passed. I saw curtains twitching in panic. One couple, who had hosted the neighborhood wine socials every summer, stood on their deck holding their noses. Meanwhile, Victoria raged. I saw her on her phone constantly, packing her balcony. Contractors came and went. Trucks backed up to her property with new pumps, hoses, and tanks. She even tried to float a rumor in the HOA chat. A neighbor is committing eco-terrorism against our community. We will find the culprit. I didn't respond. Harrison did. If this is eco-terrorism, then maybe the eco is finally getting its revenge. I laughed out loud when I read that one. But the laughter faded when I received a letter the next morning. Certified mail, HOA legal notice. Emergency, board meeting to discuss your removal from Silverbrook Estates. Allegations, community disruption, property devaluation, unsafe engineering practices. Attendance mandatory. I stood in my driveway holding the letter, the neighborhood quiet around me, and for the first time, I felt the weight of what I was doing. I was winning the war of water. But Victoria was about to launch her counterattack in the war of perception. And perception was the only war most neighbors cared about. The emergency meeting was 3 nights away. 3 nights for the lake to fall a little more. 3 nights for panic to tighten its grip on her perfect little kingdom. 3 nights for me to decide whether I would go all in, or let fear pull me back. That evening, I sat by the lake with my feet in the mud, watching the sun burn the water orange and gold. For a brief moment, doubt crept in. Was I becoming the villain she claimed I was? Was I really just a man avenging his car, with an act of slow, elegant destruction? Then my phone buzzed with a new Facebook notification. HOA page, posted by Victoria Sterling. Photo of my crushed Lamborghini. Caption, "This is what happens when you disrespect the rules. Quality community." The comments were a mix of laughter and praise from her loyalists. That was all the reminder I needed. I wasn't the villain. I was the correction. I stood, wiped the mud from my hands, and looked across the shrinking water toward Victoria's mansion. The lights on her deck flickered on as she came outside, phone pressed to her ear, still fighting a war she didn't even understand she'd already lost. Because water, like justice, always finds its level. And Victoria Sterling was about to drown in her own arrogance. The night of the emergency HOA meeting felt like a storm without rain. Even before I arrived at the clubhouse, the air was heavy with whispers. Curtains twitched as I passed. Neighbors lingered in driveways, murmuring to one another, their eyes darting between me and the shrinking lake behind their homes. The mudline had now widened into a raw, jagged scar around the once perfect crystal lake. Docks floated in awkward angles. Boats sat stranded in knee-deep water. And the smell, an unmistakable mix of rotting vegetation and exposed earth, hung in the air like a secret no one could ignore. I parked my truck in the visitor lot, deliberately calm, my hands steady on the wheel. When I stepped out, all conversation seemed to stop. People who once waved now avoided my eyes. Others stared openly, curiosity mingled with fear. I walked past them like a man walking to his own trial. Inside the HOA clubhouse, the fluorescent lights hummed above a room that felt like a courtroom. Folding chairs were arranged in neat rows, but the tension was anything but orderly. At the front of the room, Victoria Sterling stood in a pristine cream suit, her posture flawless, her smile sharpened into a blade. Beside her sat 2 other board members, both shifting uncomfortably in their seats, and a man I recognized as a private security officer, probably there to make me feel small. The room quieted as she lifted her hands in mock graciousness. "Mr. Reeves," she said, her voice carrying across the room like a church sermon, "thank you for joining us." Every eye turned to me. I gave a polite nod and took a seat in the last row. Harrison sat 2 seats over, his arms folded, face unreadable. Victoria cleared her throat, holding up a stack of printed photographs. These, she said, clicking to a slideshow on the projector, are images of our once pristine community. As you can see. The first image appeared, the lake now ringed with mud. Gasps filled the room. Our beautiful Crystal Lake has been subjected to deliberate sabotage. Property values are plummeting, wildlife is suffering, and our neighborhood, the pride of Silverbrook Estates, is in crisis. She clicked to the next slide. My garage door, my survey equipment, my face caught in the reflection of my truck mirror as I measured water levels at night. Here, she said, is our problem resident, conducting suspicious activities at all hours, tampering with community infrastructure, engaging in what can only be described as eco-terrorism. A murmur ran through the room. I let her speak. I let her twist the knife. Because I knew something she didn't. I had my own knife, sharper than hers, and I was going to use it. Victoria gestured to the private security guard, who stepped forward like a courtroom bailiff. The board is moving to vote on Mr. Reeves' immediate removal from Silverbrook Estates. He has violated our trust and endangered our property values. If he refuses to comply, we are prepared to seek a court order. A hand shot up in the second row. It was Mrs. Alvarez, a quiet widow whose backyard faced the lake. Her voice trembled. Victoria, are you saying he did all this on purpose? That he drained the lake? Victoria gave a sympathetic nod, the way a predator pretends to care about the prey it's already bitten. Yes, sadly. He has admitted to working on the drainage system and has refused to cooperate with the board's requests. We believe he's using his professional knowledge to harm us. Another neighbor spoke up, this time a young father. But why? Why would he do that? Victoria didn't hesitate. Revenge over a parking violation. I almost laughed out loud. That was her story, that was all she had. When she finally paused for dramatic effect, I rose to my feet. May I speak? The room went silent. Victoria's smile twitched, briefly. I walked to the front of the room, slow and measured, and placed a thick folder on the table. This, I said, tapping the folder, is a 47-page report submitted to the city of Silverbrook. It documents every illegal modification made to Crystal Lake's water system over the last 5 years. Gasps again. Illegal modifications, I repeated, my voice calm, installed by your HOA president, Mrs. Sterling. Boost pumps, unauthorized pressure lines, illegal water diversions, all of which put your homes at risk and violated both municipal and federal codes. I opened the folder, sliding out glossy photos, corroded pipes, jury-rigged pumps hidden in landscaping, and a municipal water meter showing over 800 gallons per day, triple the legal limit for a residential property. This lake, I continued, turning to the crowd, was never a natural lake. It is a retention pond designed to be 12 feet deep. Right now, or rather last week, it was over 18 feet. That's 6 feet higher than the original engineering plan. 6 feet of extra pressure against your foundations, your docks, and your septic systems. I let that sink in. If I had done nothing, I said quietly, you wouldn't be having a property value problem. You'd be having a property collapse problem. Flooding, foundation failure, sinkholes. I heard the ripple of whispers, fear replacing anger. Mrs. Sterling knew this, I said, turning my gaze to her, and she did it anyway. Because the higher water made her property look like a private resort, and she thought she could get away with it, just like she got away with towing and crushing my car over a rule she invented 3 weeks ago. Gasps turned to outright talking now. I saw people glance at Victoria, at each other, at the projected photo of my Lamborghini Cube with her grinning in the background. I leaned on the table. Water, I said slowly, doesn't care about egos. It only cares about balance. And when you mess with that balance, eventually it fights back. I just made sure it fought back safely. For the first time all night, Victoria's smile faltered. Her voice rose shrill. Lies, he's just trying to save himself. You saw the mud. He's destroying our community. Harrison stood then, his gravelly voice cutting through the noise. Victoria, sit down. I filed EPA reports on you 2 years ago. I know what you did. We all do now. The room erupted. Voices rose, overlapping. You did this to us. Is this why the city ignored my complaints? How much money did you steal from us? Victoria backed toward the podium, sputtering, trying to regain control. But control was gone. The emergency meeting dissolved into chaos. Neighbors who had feared her now crowded forward, demanding answers. Someone shouted about selling their house. Someone else demanded a recall vote. I stood still in the storm of voices, a quiet smile forming as the psychological tide turned. Victoria's empire of intimidation had cracked. And I hadn't even fully drained the lake yet. That night, I walked home under the streetlights, the sound of angry neighbors still echoing behind me. I paused by the municipal panel and rested my hand on the cool metal. Phase 2 would begin at dawn. Victoria Sterling thought tonight was a nightmare. She had no idea how much darker the morning would be. At exactly 6:00 a.m., I turned the valve. Phase 2 had begun. The cool morning air filled my lungs as the faint metallic click of the municipal panel echoed through the stillness. It wasn't dramatic, no gushing water, no roaring machinery, just a subtle shift in pressure, a whisper in the veins of the neighborhood. But the lake felt it. By the time the sun cleared the rooftops, Crystal Lake had started to retreat like a wounded animal. I walked along the shoreline, boots sinking into fresh mud where water had been just the day before. A heron, confused and angry, picked through the exposed earth for stranded fish. The air smelled of wet soil and something older, like secrets pulled from the bottom of a swamp. Across the water, I saw Victoria's deck door slam open. Even from 100 yards away, I could see her panic. She stood frozen for a heartbeat, robe flapping in the wind, before rushing to her dock. Her pristine white sandals sank into the mud as she stumbled toward her speedboat. It sat crooked now, half the lift exposed, its gleaming hull coated in muck. The Queen of Silverbrook Estates had mud on her shoes. And that was only the beginning. By noon, the lake had dropped another 1.5 feet. Residents emerged like ants from a disturbed nest. Some wandered to the shore, shaking their heads in disbelief. Others snapped photos on their phones. Harrison strolled past my house with his morning coffee, nodding in satisfaction. She's in trouble now, he muttered. He wasn't wrong. Around 2 p.m., a white SUV with city markings rolled up to Victoria's mansion. Out stepped Marcus Chen, the city's lead water engineer. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses reflecting the chaos, he walked straight to the lake's edge. I watched from my porch as Victoria intercepted him, her hands flying in animated gestures. Marcus barely nodded as he scanned the shoreline, took a few readings, and scribbled notes. Within minutes, he was on his phone. By 3 p.m., 3 more city trucks arrived. By 4 p.m., a small crowd had gathered near Victoria's property, neighbors whispering, filming, posting. Then it happened. The first viral moment. Victoria, in a full meltdown, screamed at Marcus Chen loud enough for the entire lake to hear. This is sabotage. I am the president of this HOA. I demand you fix this now. Marcus didn't even raise his voice. Ma'am, you've violated multiple municipal codes. This lake was never supposed to be this high. What's happening now is correction. Phones were everywhere. By dinner time, a video titled Lakefront Karen Meltdown was all over TikTok. Victoria, screaming with mud on her legs, waving her arms as the calm city engineer walked away. 2 million views in 24 hours. And the lake kept dropping. By day 2 of Phase 2, the transformation was undeniable. Crystal Lake looked like a crime scene. The once-proud docks jutted into empty air. Boat lifts hung uselessly. Exposed mud cracked in the sun, releasing a stench that drifted across the cul-de-sac like a curse. Neighbors held their noses as they walked to their mailboxes. Some started wearing masks. Real estate agents quietly pulled listings. Property values plunged overnight. And the anger, oh the anger. But it wasn't aimed at me anymore. The truth was spreading. Harrison had posted the municipal blueprints and my 47-page report in the HOA Facebook group. Screenshots of Victoria's water usage numbers leaked. The tide had turned. That evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, I walked the lake's perimeter. The once pristine surface now reflected jagged edges of mud and stranded debris. Half-buried boat anchors, rotting vegetation, and the skeletal remains of trees long forgotten beneath the waterline emerged like ghosts. Every step I took squelched in the exposed earth. Every step was a reminder that empires built on vanity eventually sink into the muck. Victoria, though, refused to accept reality. On the third day, she tried to fight back. Trucks rolled up to her property carrying industrial pumps and shiny new hoses. Workers scrambled to connect them, trying to force water back into the shrinking lake. I stood at the edge of my property, arms folded, and waited. They turned on the first pump. The motor whined, hoses shook, for a moment water gushed. Then nothing. The system coughed and spat. The illegal pressure loops Victoria had created were now a death trap for her own equipment. Pumps overheated. One burst a hose, spraying muddy water all over her white patio furniture. I could almost hear the universe laughing. By evening, the hashtag #DrainTheKaren was trending. Clips of the dead pumps, the exposed docks, and the rotting shoreline spread across social media. Even the local news showed up, cameras rolling as Marcus Chen gave a calm statement. Water management is a science, not a suggestion. This is what happens when you play games with public infrastructure. The camera caught Victoria in the background, arms crossed, face red with rage. And the lake kept dropping. By day 4, Crystal Lake was a shadow of its former self. 10 feet deep. Exactly where it was designed to be in 1987. Victoria's private beach, a mudflat crawling with flies. Her koi ponds, half-dry, fish gasping in shallow pools. Her $180,000 Brazilian hardwood dock, sitting like a beached whale, 8 feet from the water's edge. The smell drove neighbors indoors. And for the first time since this war began, Victoria didn't leave her house. I watched her curtains twitch as Harrison, and I stood by the lake that evening, the last light turning the cracked earth gold. "She's broken," Harrison said softly. "Not yet," I replied, "but she will be." That night, I sat on my porch scrolling through my phone. CNN had picked up the story. Engineer versus HOA president, the $6 million lake war. Clips of Victoria's meltdown and the lake's transformation played side by side with my report and Marcus Chen's official statements. Comments poured in from around the country. "This is the most satisfying HOA story I've ever seen. Justice served cold and muddy. Engineers don't get mad, they get even." I leaned back in my chair, letting the cool night air wash over me. The battle wasn't over. But the war had tipped irreversibly in my favor. Victoria Sterling, had tried to drown me in rules and humiliation. And now, she was the one gasping for air in the ruins of her own kingdom. By the end of that week, the lake wasn't the only thing evaporating. Victoria Sterling's power, once absolute, was slipping away drop by drop. The HOA Facebook group, which she had ruled with an iron fist of deleted comments and smug captions, was now a battlefield she couldn't control. Neighbors posted photos of their stranded docks, their rotting lawns, and the exposed skeleton of the lake. They tagged the city, the county, and in one glorious post, the Environmental Protection Agency. Then someone leaked the video of her meltdown in front of Marcus Chen. By Monday morning, the clip had been stitched into TikTok reactions, memes, and duet videos with captions like, "When you mess with an engineer's car." Lakefront Karen vs. Science, 01. Water always finds its level, and so does karma. It hit 3.2 million views in 72 hours. Victoria's carefully curated image as the queen of suburban perfection was gone. She had become a caricature of herself, a woman in a silk robe, screaming at a calm engineer, standing in the mud of her own making. But social humiliation was only the beginning. I woke up that morning to a knock at my door. Harrison stood there, holding a thick envelope. "You're going to like this," he said. Inside were official documents, city inspection reports, legal notices, and a letter from the State Water Board. Victoria Sterling was under investigation for illegal water diversion, unpermitted pump installation, exceeding municipal water usage limits by 340%, potential environmental endangerment. And that wasn't even the best part. The last page bore the unmistakable seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Harrison grinned. "I told you, I filed a federal complaint months ago about her insurance fraud. Your lake stunt gave them the perfect excuse to dig in." Insurance fraud. The words rolled in my mind like a slow, inevitable avalanche. The rumors were true. Victoria's water games weren't just about vanity, they were part of a scheme. She had been filing insurance claims for water damage, allegedly caused by neighbor negligence, to collect payouts. She used those payouts to acquire properties through her shell company, Lakefront Holdings LLC. Now, with the lake drained to its legal level, the truth was exposed in literal daylight. Foundation cracks, rotting dock supports, collapsed septic systems that had been propped up by illegally high water levels. All evidence of fraud. And all of it traceable. By day 10, the raid happened. I was on my porch when the first unmarked SUV rolled into Silverbrook Estates, followed by two more, and then a white van with bold yellow letters, FBI. Neighbors emerged in clusters, phones in hand. They didn't have to wonder which house the agents were visiting. Victoria. I could see her through the bay window as they approached, hair wild, phone clutched to her ear, packing like a trapped animal. When she opened the door, the lead agent held up a warrant. The conversation was brief. And then, in the most poetic twist of fate, Victoria Sterling was led out in handcuffs across her perfect lawn, silk robe fluttering in the morning breeze. Neighbors filmed. Someone shouted, "Smile for TikTok." The footage would later hit 10 million views, under the tag, Lakefront Karen arrested. I didn't cheer, I didn't gloat. I just watched. Because this wasn't the end. This was the turning of the tide. As agents hauled out boxes of financial records and hard drives, the story unfolded in real time online and on TV. Local news: HOA president arrested in Silverbrook scandal. CNN: $6 million Lake war leads to federal investigation. Reddit, Engineer 1, HOA 0. Harrison knocked on my door again that afternoon, grinning ear to ear. "You realize," he said, "you just set the internet on fire. People are calling you the Water Avenger." I chuckled, shaking my head. I didn't set anything on fire, I just turned the valve. The legal cascade hit like a waterfall. Victoria faced federal charges: mail fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. State charges piled on: insurance fraud, filing false police reports, and illegal water diversion. Civil suits from neighbors totaled $4.2 million in damages. Her assets were frozen, her mansion liened by the city for $180,000 in unpaid fines. Within 2 weeks, the woman who had crushed my car and strutted through this neighborhood like a queen had lost everything that mattered to her: her power, her status, her freedom. And the lake. It was perfect. 8.5 feet deep. Clearer than it had been in years. Breathing again. Marcus Chen's official report praised the emergency engineering measures I'd taken to restore ecological balance. The HOA, under Harrison's temporary leadership, voted unanimously to implement my water management system as permanent policy. I was no longer the villain. I was the man who saved Silverbrook Estates and delivered justice in the process. But revenge has flavors. Some are sharp and fast, like the crunch of a Lamborghini under a hydraulic claw. Others are slow and savory, like watching a tyrant sink into the mud she created. As I stood on my porch one evening, the sun painting the lake in warm orange light, I saw the last of the FBI vans leaving the neighborhood. Victoria was gone. Her mansion sat dark and silent, its private beach now a stretch of cracked earth with a sign reading "Property seized by Federal Authorities." I took a long breath and let the satisfaction wash over me. I didn't destroy her. I just showed everyone the truth. Water did the rest. The sun rose over Silverbrook Estates like nothing had happened. Birds chirped in the willows by the lake. Ducks glided across the water, finally calm, finally balanced. But the neighborhood had changed forever. Victoria Sterling's mansion sat silent, its grand double doors now sealed with bright orange federal seizure notices. Where once her fountains glittered, weeds had begun to sprout through the cracked tiles of her drained paradise. For the first time since moving here, I felt the community exhale. Neighbors waved again. Children rode their bikes past my driveway without their parents dragging them away. And for the first time in months, I wasn't the villain. The story didn't stay local for long. 2 weeks after the FBI raid, Silverbrook hit national headlines. Engineer brings down corrupt HOA president in $6 lake scandal. Water finds its level, and so does justice. The $350,000 Lamborghini revenge story America can't stop watching. Clips of my crushed Lamborghini Cube played side by side with Victoria's arrest video. Commentators on morning shows debated the morality of my actions, while social media declared the verdict unanimously. I wasn't a criminal. I was a folk hero. TikTok edits paired footage of the draining lake with dramatic orchestral music and captions like, "Never underestimate an engineer," and "When you mess with water, water messes back." Someone even created a meme of Victoria's screaming face, superimposed on a sinking ship, with the hashtag #DrainTheKaren. The legal machine moved faster than I ever expected. Victoria Sterling was denied bail after federal prosecutors revealed evidence of her 4-year insurance fraud scheme. Her shell company, Lakefront Holdings LLC, had laundered $1.8 million through bogus claims of neighbor-caused water damage. Investigators found doctored photos, fake contractor invoices, and emails bragging about getting rid of problem neighbors to acquire properties cheap. The neighbors she had driven out, 12 families over 3 years, were now part of a class action lawsuit seeking millions in damages. Even the city and the EPA filed claims against her for infrastructure tampering and illegal water diversion. And then came the state charges. Insurance fraud. Filing false police reports. HOA misconduct under California real estate law. It was a perfect storm of accountability. For me, life changed in ways I never imagined. The viral fame translated into opportunity. My small engineering firm, once scraping for municipal contracts, now had national attention. 3 other gated communities reached out, asking for help investigating corrupt HOAs and infrastructure abuse. One email even said, "We think we have our own Victoria, can you help us?" I had gone from crushed car victim to consulting hero of HOA resistance. A local TV station interviewed me on the shoreline of the restored Crystal Lake. "Mr. Reeves," the reporter asked, microphone gleaming in the sun, "do you feel guilty for what happened to Mrs. Sterling?" I paused, letting the camera capture the calm reflection of water behind me. "I didn't destroy her," I said quietly. "I just turned the lights on. She destroyed herself the moment she chose power over decency. Water just made it visible." The clip went viral, again. Meanwhile, Victoria's world was collapsing in slow motion. From federal court transcripts and local news, I pieced together the picture. She was assigned to a federal detention center in downtown LA while awaiting sentencing. Her assets were frozen: the mansion, the speedboat, the luxury cars she loved to flaunt. Madison Pierce, her loyal vice president of the HOA, resigned and quietly cut a deal with investigators, providing emails and call logs that showed just how deep Victoria's corruption ran. Neighbors whispered about her in the past tense now, like a ghost haunting the lake she once ruled. Children rode their bikes past her empty property and laughed at the lakefront current stickers someone had placed on the mailbox. The lake itself became a symbol. At 8.5 feet deep, it reflected the sky perfectly, its edges framed by natural grasses instead of manicured excess. Marcus Chen and his city team confirmed that fish populations were thriving again, and the exposed shoreline had allowed for long-overdue ecological cleanup. What had once been an engineered lie was now a sustainable ecosystem, and the neighbors, ironically, loved it. Open house listings even began advertising. Community lake recently restored to environmentally optimal level by certified engineer. The same lake that once symbolized Victoria's vanity had become my quiet monument to justice. The invitations started coming next. Engineering conferences wanted me to speak about infrastructure and ethics. A TEDx organizer emailed with the subject line, "Your story is the talk the world needs." Even a Netflix documentary team showed up, cameras rolling, asking to film the man who drained a tyrant's lake. It felt surreal. I was still the same man who had once eaten ramen and stared at the Lamborghini brochure tacked to my wall. But now, people looked at me like I was a symbol. And maybe I was. Because this wasn't just about a car or a lake or a single HOA. This was about fighting back, about proving that knowledge, patience, and precision can take down even the most arrogant bullies. Then came the sentencing hearing. I wasn't required to attend. But I did. The federal courtroom was cold and sterile, the air thick with the weight of consequence. Victoria Sterling shuffled in wearing a tan prison jumpsuit, wrists shackled, hair limp and lifeless. She didn't look like the Queen of Silverbrook Estates anymore. She looked small. The judge reviewed her charges in a voice that could have cut glass. Mail fraud. Wire fraud. Conspiracy. Insurance fraud. Filing false reports. Infrastructure tampering. Each word landed like a gavel in my chest. When the sentence finally came, it was almost poetic. 28 months in federal prison, $2.4 million in restitution, permanent ban from serving on any HOA board in the state of California. The same neighbors she had terrorized sat in the gallery, whispering. Some filmed on their phones as the judge spoke the final words. Mrs. Sterling, power is not a license to harm. Your downfall is your own creation. I watched her shuffle out of the courtroom without looking back. No one followed her. No one cried for her. Not one neighbor stood up to say goodbye. That night, I drove home with the windows down, the cool air carrying the faint scent of water and pine. Crystal Lake shimmered in the moonlight, perfectly level, perfectly calm. My new Lamborghini, an Evo in deep Victoria blue, purred as I pulled into the same driveway where my first car had been destroyed. Above my license plate, the custom tag gleamed in the dark. H2O King. I parked, got out, and stood by the lake for a long moment. The journey from humiliation to justice had been slow, muddy, and exhausting. But in the end, the water was clear. And so was my conscience. Victoria Sterling had tried to drown me in bureaucracy. Instead, I had drained her empire. And the world had watched every drop fall. 2 years later, the sun set over Silverbrook Estates in a golden glow. Crystal Lake, no longer a lie, no longer a weapon, reflected the evening sky like polished glass. The water level was perfect, 8.5 feet, steady as my own heartbeat. Families walked along the shoreline, children laughing, ducks gliding, and the smell of warm earth and clean water replacing the rotting stench that had once haunted this place. The neighborhood had changed in ways I couldn't have imagined. Victoria Sterling's old mansion, once a fortress of intimidation, now wore a new face. The Water Rights Education Center read the bronze plaque out front. We bought it through my firm and converted it into our community headquarters, a place where homeowners across the state came to learn about HOA accountability, sustainable engineering, and the power of speaking up. In the garden where Victoria once sipped wine and planned her next act of cruelty, children now ran through sprinklers fed by a rainwater collection system I designed. Every drop of water in this place now served a purpose. Inside, our office hummed with quiet focus. My engineering team, 47 strong now, designed water systems for cities, communities, and neighborhoods across the country. We weren't just an engineering firm anymore. We were a movement. We helped 23 other communities fight back against corrupt HOAs, exposing patterns of abuse, fraud, and arrogance. Each victory felt like another small dam breaking, letting justice flow where it was meant to. People sent letters, emails, photos of lakes, pools, and community centers we'd saved. I still remembered the first time I opened an envelope from an elderly couple in Arizona. Inside was a simple note. They told us we had no power, then we read your story, thank you for giving us hope. Meanwhile, Victoria Sterling's name became a warning in every HOA and property law seminar in California. Her sentence had run its course, but freedom hadn't brought her redemption. When she stepped out of federal prison, no one waited for her. She'd lost everything. Her mansion sold at 40% below market value, proceeds seized to pay restitution. Her shell company dissolved. Her personal accounts emptied by legal fees and penalties. She lived now in a small apartment in Van Nuys, working a retail job that barely covered rent. Neighbors whispered that she sometimes drove past Silverbrook, only to be turned away by private security at the front gate. The last time I saw her was through the tinted glass of my office window. A gray sedan pulled up to the old mansion's driveway, our community center now, and idled. Through the windshield, I caught a glimpse of her face, pale, sunken, and aged by bitterness. She didn't get out. She just sat there for a long minute, staring at the life she'd once owned. When our security team approached, she drove away slowly. And that was the last time. Life in Silverbrook had never been better. The annual water festival, our new tradition, drew visitors from across Southern California. Neighbors grilled by the lakeshore, kids raced paddle boats, and the Lamborghini Cube, my original crushed car, now stood on a small stone pedestal with a plaque. Memorial to Automotive Injustice, never forget. People took selfies with it. It was funny, in a bittersweet way. The car that once represented pain and humiliation had become a symbol of victory. My own life had transformed in ways I hadn't dared to dream. Forbes 40 Under 40 named me one of the top innovators in urban water management. I gave a TED Talk titled, How Engineering Can Fight Corruption, which hit 4.2 million views. Netflix released Draining Karen's Lake, the Emmy-winning documentary based on our story. I had married Sarah Chen, the documentary filmmaker who covered the saga from the start. Our wedding took place on the lakeshore, under the soft glow of string lights, right where Victoria once envisioned her private empire. Harrison Blake, my steadfast ally, officiated the ceremony with a smile that spoke volumes. We had built something stronger than any HOA rulebook could ever destroy. Nationally, the ripple effects of the Silverbrook method changed everything. 67 copycat cases popped up across the country, using our blueprint to challenge HOA corruption. Federal legislation, unofficially dubbed the Victoria Sterling Prevention Act, passed to increase HOA oversight and protect homeowners. Engineering schools began teaching ethical infrastructure management, citing our story as a case study in civic justice through technical knowledge. I had started this journey as a man crushed under the weight of one woman's arrogance. Now, I was the engineer who turned water into justice. On quiet evenings, I still walked the shoreline with Sarah, hand in hand. The water shimmered at its perfect depth, reflecting the lights of our community center, once the throne room of a suburban tyrant, now a beacon of transparency and unity. Neighbors waved, children played, the smell of barbecues drifted through the air. And every so often, I would pause, take it in, and whisper to myself, "Justice flows." Because that was the lesson of it all. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it moves silently, through pipes and valves, through patience and precision, through the calm certainty that water always finds its level. And so does justice. Victoria Sterling wanted to drown me in bureaucracy and break me with a single act of cruelty. Instead, I drained her empire, one drop at a time. And when the water cleared, the reflection staring back at me wasn't a man consumed by revenge. It was a man at peace, standing by a lake that told the whole world. Never underestimate an engineer. Every HOA has a story on HOA headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.